I have a shed in the garden, and it's got all the old boots in with little labels on to say what they've done. I just don't carry water, which would probably horrify you, but I don't carry water and I don't drink water. And I get told off all the time, but this is the way you may. Because in the previous life I was a Bedouin in the desert with 300 goats and a harem of 30 women.
Best ultra runners tell me I was crazy.
It's now 152. I've just started wearing my 153rd pair.
I've managed to catch you when you're stationary then, have I?
Yes, well, I was out on Saturday, but that's...
Out for a quick bimble?
Yeah, well, I'm just walking the Pilgrim's Way to Canterbury, just doing it in stages. I actually walked it in 1977.
Wow. So, you're clearly a person that makes a connection with life when you're on your walks. Am I right?
Yes.
It's incredible. Friends at home, John Merrill is probably the UK's most famous marathon walker. You know, walking was just something you did on a Sunday after you'd had your roast, and few people took it a bit further, but John really kind of smashed it out the park. He's incredibly famous for extremely long walks all over the world. We're talking now, and John, feel free to correct me, but we're talking almost 250,000 miles. Not just the walking, but writing books to chronicle his journey, so other people can then, buy the guide, follow in his footsteps. I read something, John, on Wikipedia. You'd worn out 149 pairs of boots.
It's now 152. I've just started wearing my 153rd pair.
1,500 pairs of socks and it was 49 rucksacks.
Yes, that's...
And
I keep them all.
Yes,
I keep them all because they're like best friends, really.
Wow, we do get attached to our equipment, don't we?
Yes, well, I have a shed in the garden, and it's got all the old boots in with little labels on to say what they've done. I have this mad idea that when I finally get buried, instead of throwing roses on the coffin, you throw the old boots on.
How did you get into walking and then marathon walking?
At the age of 6.5, I was at a school in Sheffield, and they took us out one afternoon, the whole class, into the Rivlin Valley, and I ran up and down the rocks of Belhag, and I thought this was sensational. I just enjoyed the scenery and the views, and it made a very deep impression. And from that moment onwards, I knew that the outdoors was going to be my life, but how? I had no idea.
And your first walk?
I was out in the Peak District regularly, and I was actually climbing a lot with the gritstone edges, and climbing them 3 nights a week, and then at the weekends in places like the Lake District and North Wales and so on, and Scotland. But I was climbing more at first to start with, but they would climb up till lunchtime, and then they'd disappear to the pub and get drunk, really, and that wasn't really my idea. I just wanted to climb all day, so I drifted away from that. The club did a walk around the island of Arran and climbed a few of the mountains, and I thought, what else is there? And I looked on the map, and there was the island of Mull. So I thought, well, I'll walk round that and see if this idea of mine about making a living from doing the walking was possible. And I walked round part of the island, and I got down the Ross of Mull and was overlooking the island of Iona, and a rowing boat pulled up, and the boatman said, "Do you want to go to the island?" And I said, "Well, yes, please." And so he rowed me across to the island, and I camped outside the abbey, which you can't do now, but I did then. And it was raining, and I walked into the abbey itself and saw there was a service at 6 o'clock. Put it in the back of my mind, went back to the tent and read a book and cooked a meal. But at 5 to 6, a voice in me said, "Go and to that service." So I went to the service, wondering what I was doing, singing the hymns and the prayers. And then it came to the sermon. And it was the main theme was that God gives you the chance to do what you should be doing. And if you don't take it, you get it again. And I sat up upright. That's it. I've got the chance to do it. So the next day I continued and walked around the rest of the island, about 230 miles. And I got back to Oban, and I drove down to Sheffield because I was working for my father, had a chemical factory. And I walked into his office first thing Monday morning and gave him 6 months' notice. It was a bit shell-shocked. But in the 6 months that I had this idea that I'd been walking around the Isle of Mull of doing a 1,000-mile walk and linking all the islands of the Inner and Outer Hebrides together. So I worked it all out, 54 days, and got to all the islands. And also I thought, there's not a book on walking in Derbyshire. So I wrote one, and I just sent it to the first publisher, local publisher, and they accepted it. It sold 9,500 copies, and then they said, "We're not going to reprint it." I said, "Well, it's got short and long walks. Can't we split it into 2 books? So we've got short walks for the motorist and long walks for the rambler." And they said, "Oh, that's a good idea." And the short walks for the motorist sold 95,000 copies, and the long walk one sold 65,000 copies. Mm. But anyway, on June the 1st, I set off and walked 1,000 miles through the Inner and Outer Hebrides, and it only rained once. Absolutely breathtaking. It was stunning. So that was the first walk, a long walk, as it were.
John, I just want to chip in here and say, isn't that a wonderful bit of advice for the people watching now at home and the people listening? How many people must be locked into a job that they probably don't even like, or at best they bear it because it pays the bills? Would you encourage people to follow their dreams, is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, don't listen to anyone's advice. If it's what you want to do, set off, and it will all happen.
Because I've done a bit of long distance stuff myself. I don't know if Susie told you, but I crossed 250 kilometers of the Sahara in the famous Marathon of the Sands. And I did John O'Groats to Land's End. Yeah, I went downhill. Psychologically, even though I live in the Southwest, going uphill, no way.
One of the best bits of advice I was told is don't tell anyone, just go and do it, because it'll put you off and bring up all sorts of barriers, and which then circulate in your head, and you won't want to go and do it then.
When you started out, being, a generation before me, I bet everybody tried to talk you up because they were really quite regimented, weren't they? In like, you work hard for a living, and you have your Sunday off, and you have a roast, and then you go back to work on the Monday, and that's what a man does. Did people think you were crazy?
Yes, and they tried to put me off all over the place, but that's why I shut up and just set off. And then, I walked up through the Hebrides, and the next year I linked all the islands of the Orkneys and the Shetlands together. And that was another 1,000-mile walk.
You did the Land's End to John O'Groats, so foolishly you went uphill, but that's easy mistake to make. First to walk the entire British coastline, 7,000 miles across America, coast to coast. I'm fascinated to ask you about that.
Yes.
And this is a little bit my neck of the woods, the Jotunheimen. That's Norway, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. First crossing of the Jotunheimen Mountains and glaciers. You crossed 28 glaciers and climbed all the highest peaks. Is it Gauderpiggen or Gauderpiggen?
Yes, Gauderpiggen, yes.
Yes, I think I've done that one.
It was my father, really. Got on my third school. I was a disaster at school. I failed everything and got school records for the highest number of whacks with the cane. Normally you got 3 at one bending, and if you were very bad, you got 6, but I got 9. And by the time I left, I had 76 whacks with the cane.
Did that give you a distrust of authority?
No, I just brushed it aside. I didn't pay much attention to it at all. Sort of jumping ahead a bit, I was adopted. And at the age of 13 in school, they started teasing me, saying, "You're adopted." To me. My father came up. I called him my father, but because I never met my real father. But he told me a story that my father was in the RAF and shot down over Germany, and my mother was in with me and child, but the shock of him dying and being killed sent her into labour, and she died. And I was a 7-month child. And I thought no more about it until the last 20-odd years or so. And I've been researching my past now. Well, my adopted father, he gave me my adoption birth certificate. And from that number, I could trace, but I never told him. Well, he died 3 months later, but because he was brilliant and he did everything possible, really. But I discovered then that I did have a natural sister, and I discovered who my father was, although he never saw me, and so on. So it's been a steep learning curve, and it's still going on, really. But I also, in the research, I read this book, Primal Wound, 2 years ago, and it's about people who have been taken from the birth mother, and it does affect them. And this is why I was rebellious at school. I mean, the father, the headmaster suggested I go to a specialist and be checked out. And so I went to Harley Street, and I had 2 hours of exams and questions and so on. And the specialist came out to my father and said, "I have bad news for you." He says he's normal.
Was that reassuring for you?
Well, I didn't think I was any different, but
no. Well, John, here's the thing. I studied youth work. That was my at uni, and one of the things you learn is attachment theory. It goes back to Dr. Bowlby. I'm sure you've maybe heard of him. And he said, he did an important piece of work. He said that the early years for an infant and the attachment with their mother can really dictate how they will be later in life.
Yes, yeah.
And generally, when that attachment is fractured in any way, such as, things possibly adoption or people placed in care, that young person can grow up really disruptive, if not even sort of sociopathic later in life.
Yes, yeah.
You seem the complete opposite of a sociopath, John.
Yes, I'm completely sane, as it were. I have no problems whatsoever. But I subsequently discovered that my mother had died and was looking for me for the last 10 years. But of course, all avenues were closed to her. I've just got 2 half sisters, and I'm an uncle to many and a great uncle. And now I've got a great niece. So it's still unfolding, really.
Mm. And The story about your dad being shot down over Germany, was that true, or was that just your adoptive father protecting you?
I understand why he said it. He was in the RAF, and it was a one-night stand in Luton. And my mother didn't die in childbirth, of course.
John, let's talk about equipment, because I'm guessing on your longer walks, you camped out.
If you're walking, like one year, I walked the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. So I brought 14, it was about a dozen parcels with 14 days of food in, because every 14 days I'd call at the post office on the route and get my next lot of food that I would need, because I would not see anyone or anything for another 14 days. But I met up with all these parcels, but it was a fantastic walk.
That's kind of like they call it depoting, don't they? When they cross Antarctica,
yes,
and they bury the food in the snow, 20 miles ahead.
Well,
yes.
I walked the Appalachian Trail, and I did the same thing on that. And I went back recently. I walked the Chesapeake, Ohio Canal, which crosses the Appalachian Trail, and people don't do that anymore. They walk for a couple of days and then take the first forest road down and get the food and back on the trail. To me, it spoils it.
Yes, there was a chat. I don't know if you ever heard of Scott Jurek. No, he's one of the world's most famous ultra runners. He's also famous for being a vegan sort of chef, I suppose you'd say. And he ran the Appalachian Trail. Is it about 2,800 miles?
Yeah, well, not far off. You go from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine.
Yeah, he ran it in something crazy like, oh gosh, like three weeks or something, doing like 100 miles a day or something crazy like that. And when he got to the end, and he'd obviously broken all previous records, they poured him a glass of champagne. At which point the park police came and arrested him for drinking alcohol in the park. I thought, what is the world coming to? Did you see any bears?
Oh yes, I had bears right up to the tent and breathing in my ear, really. Well, he bang your pans and make as much noise as possible, and he did go away. And I lay there sweating, and he came back again an hour later. And I frightened him off again. And there was a cabin nearby, and I thought, I'll see if I can get in there. Took the tent down, and I couldn't get in the cabin, but there was a wood store next door. And I got in the door and fastened it and put my sleeping bag on top of all the wood pile. And then I couldn't go to sleep because all the mice were jumping up and down on me.
You must have seen the equipment change over the years from fairly sort of basic post-war kind of kit to all this Gore-Tex and carbon fiber and, ultra lightweight stuff. How has that been?
Yeah, well, walking the Appalachian Trail or Pacific Crest Trail, I was carrying about 60 pounds of equipment. But then we had 12 or 14 days of food to start with. So we ate well for the first week and then starved for the second to get the weight down. But I did use Gore-Tex, but for me, it doesn't work.
Why is that?
Because I generate too much heat, and the Gore-Tex just won't handle it. I mean, the equipment manufacturers were horrified to say it doesn't work, but we're all individual. We're all built differently. When I walked the Pacific Crest Trail, I crossed the Mojave Desert. It was 120 degrees, and I had 60 pounds on my back. I had an ice axe and rope because 2 days later I'd be on top of a 12,000 foot mountain. But I just don't carry water, which would probably horrify you, but I don't carry water and I don't drink water. And I get told off all the time, but this is the way you're made. Because in the previous life, I was a Bedouin in the desert with 300 goats and a harem of 30 women. And they will have something to drink at breakfast, and then they'll go all day and don't drink. And only when they get to the next oasis or where they're going to camp do they drink again. So that's where my training comes from.
That's one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard, that you don't drink water.
The simple rule is that the more you drink, the more you want to drink. And the more you drink, the more you sweat. So I find it no hardship to go 12 hours without drinking.
John, what about when you're sort of in the desert? Are you ever worried that you're not going to find a water source?
No, because you go with total faith.
Oh, beautiful. Something I guess the 99.9% of people lack. And I'll hold my hand up there and say, include myself in that 99%.
No, I've never not found somewhere to camp at the end of the day. I plan nothing. All I do is the night before I run through the route or where I want to be by tomorrow night, so that when you get up, your mind is already programmed. That's where you want to be. It's immaterial how many mountains or whatever there is to do before you get there. And I always find somewhere to camp.
Do you drink straight from the stream, or do you use chlorine tablets or anything?
No, just straight from the stream. On the Appalachian Trail one day, in the cabin, there was this funny water, so they put all these tablets in, and the things were still jumping around after 20 tablets. So I just threw the lot away. I thought, I can't handle that.
Yeah, I had.
I've never carried any tablets really. I just did it as an experiment.
I had Giardia in South America. Stupidly, I was drinking water from the tap every place that I stayed throughout Mexico, several countries, well, through all of Central America. I got down as far as Ecuador, filled up from the tap, and stupidly, I didn't even look at the water. And I didn't realize it was coming from a tank on the roof.
Oh, yeah.
And when I went up and looked at the tank on the roof, because I was really ill, the cover was half off, so it was right in the sunlight. And of course, I looked at my water bottle and it was heaving with pond life basically. And that's not a good one that's not a good parasite to get. So yes, so you've seen equipment change over the years.
I mean, I like a Gore-Tex tent because it's got plenty of room for it to breathe, but not as a clothing, for me anyway, the clothing fabric.
Well, I kind of get that. I'm okay with Gore-Tex. If I go running and it's wet, I put on an old military Gore-Tex jacket that I've got. But when I did the John O'Groats thing, I bought this ultra lightweight rain jacket. I tell you what, it got you more sweaty than it got you more wet through sweat than the blimmin' rain. I couldn't wear it. Had to keep taking my t-shirt off and just wearing the jacket.
No, I'd rather get soaked and be comfortable and carry on walking than the sweating inside and it's streaming down your arms. Yes.
You said it takes a certain amount of miles to sort of get your fitness. Then it takes a certain amount of miles to get in your stride. And then there's a certain amount of miles where maybe you're past it. Was it something like that?
Yes. Well, the first 500 miles, you're settling down and getting used to walking every day and being outside and carrying a load. So I say people who walk the Pennine Way haven't begun. But after 500 miles, you're getting more into it. And when you get to 1,000 miles, you're totally at one with everything. you're totally at peace. I mean, bears can just walk in front of me and you're not worried. If it happened in the first week, you'd be frightened to death. But when you get to 1,500 miles, you're at your peak performance, and you can hold it for about 800 miles, and then physically you're declining.
It's amazing as well how much kit you think you need, but you don't need it.
A lot of the time, I just take 2 T-shirts, one to wear in a restaurant at night or something, or and wear the other one all the time. And at night, I just stand under the shower and wash it while it's on me. But,
could you give us some examples of dangerous? Have you been robbed at all?
I've just been totally lucky, as it were. I've never had any trouble anywhere. Well, in the Himalayas once, I was walking in the Langtang Valley, and I stayed the night in this bamboo shelter. And the owner of the shelter came and sat on my bed because these 3 unsavory characters came in, and they would have robbed me and taken all the equipment. I mean, the equipment is worth more than what they'd earn in a year. So life is cheap there, but life is cheap anyway.
Where was this?
This is in the Langtang Valley in the Himalayas, in Nepal.
Hey. Yeah, it's a bit like that down there in South America. I met lots of tourists. I met lots of backpackers. And we were diving on an island off, I think it was Honduras. It's called Utila, this small island. It's beautiful. And everybody sat around the dinner table in this backpackers had been robbed in Quito. And they'd had everything. Myself and the person I was traveling with, we were the only 2. But then because I'd spent a lot of time in the Amazon, I had a big machete. I don't know if that put people at, well, I was hoping it was putting people off, Rob, but it was horrible. Down there in South America, you can be on a bus and the bandits will stop the bus on some jungle road and they would shoot the driver, and then just everybody on the bus would obviously, give them everything. It was a bit precarious down there, but hey ho. Have you had some funny moments?
I'll have to think about that one.
And also, what about interesting people? I'll go first, John. I met a guy in Hong Kong, outside Chungking Mansions, which is it's kind of like a ghetto of high rises where a lot of the emigre community live because it's really cheap. I went down there for a certain business transaction. I won't say what it was, but as I was waiting outside, this chap approached and he just had a white robe on, all kind of sort of, biblical. And he came up and he said, "Hi, my name's Pepe," which I thought was fascinating. And he'd owned a machine shop in America for years, an engineering business. And then he sold it up to become a Child of the Rainbow, which is a global wandering. It's not a cult because it's beautiful. It's a community, a global community. And they all meet up every year in somewhere beautiful on the planet. And they have workshops teaching people how to juggle and dance around the fire and massage and music. And it was incredible. And this guy he was traveling the world and he just had a little handbag.
Yes.
And he would laugh at me as some of the things I would come out with. And, I was a naive 26-year-old and he could see some of my desperation. And yeah, he was just fascinating. He was so simple.
I just have amazing encounters, really. When I was walking around the coast of Britain, I decided I would climb all the 3 highest peaks as I came up the west coast. And so, first of all, I went up Snowdon. all full of snow and ice, and I was just in my shorts and a t-shirt, and it was freezing on top. And I just got to the top, and moments later, three figures came out of the mist with ropes and ice axes and everything, and they all shook me by the hand and said, "Fancy meeting you here." And I said, "Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to have to run down to warm up." And I said, "Well," they said, we'll hopefully meet you on the top of Scarfell Pike. I said, "I'll be there in a month." And it's a true story. I got to Ravensglass, and it's a 34-mile return walk to the top of Scarfell Pike, snow and ice again. And there on the summit, I met the three climbers again.
Incredible.
It was never planned. We never communicated in between because there's no mobile phones then. I did say I'd seen them on the top of Ben Nevis, but I never did. No. But I went to Rome. Well, it's nearly 3 years ago, to get some information, because I'd walked 3 times to Mont Saint Michel, and the original St. Michael visitation site is Monte Gardeno in southern Italy, and I could find nothing about it. So I went to Rome, and I found a bookshop, and I found a guidebook and everything. And I just walked into the Vatican and had a walk round, and I just walked into the office, and I said, "Is it possible to see the Pope?" And they said, "Yes, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Whoa.
Go and see that man in the corner, he'll give you some information." And when I seen him, he told me to go to the Vatican guards outside, and he told me, "Get here early, and you got 2 lots of security to go through." And it was early. It was 10:15 when he arrived, and he blessed me, and I explained what I was doing, and he moved on to the next person.
Whoa. How did you feel after that?
Oh, I was stunned, really.
He didn't try and borrow any money off you, did he?
No.
I've heard stuff about that Pope, you know.
Oh, right.
No, I'm joking. John, what about the Camino?
Yeah,
the pilgrims.
Santiago, yes.
Yes. There's a brilliant film. Have you seen The Way with Martin Sheen?
Yes, I didn't really like it, but because it didn't capture my experience and what I had experienced on it. I've walked there 7 times now by different routes.
Wow.
I've walked it from Le Puy across the whole of France, and then along the Camino Frances to Santiago, and then on to Cape Finisterre, the end of the known world. You meet hundreds of people. It's a nightmare, because you get to a refuge where you can stay the night, and then in the morning they're all ringing up for the next one to book a place there. But I also walked from the Seville, the Silver Platter Way, and I met no one in 750 miles.
Wow.
And I've traced the whole route through Portugal from the Algarve. And again, it was only in the last 2 days that I meet people. Oh, well, I did have an amazing experience when I got to just beyond Oronsay on the Silver Way. I went into the tourist office, and they said, "You can stay in the monastery." And I said, "Could you ring them and see whether it's possible?" And they said, No, you speak to them." And I thought, well, I don't really speak Spanish. So he insisted that I try. So I went out into the phone box and got the phrase book out, and I started speaking to the monk at the other end of the phone. And he just said, No, speak in English. And they said, "What time you will be there?" I said, "Oh, 5 o'clock." He says, "When you get into the square, just ring the bell." And I got there at 5 o'clock. I rang the bell once, and the door immediately opened, and there was this Cistercian monk. And he took me along all these flagstones and past where they were saying their prayers in the chapel. And I thought he'd just get a bunk bed. But he opened the door, and there was a complete ensuite, carpeted and everything. And I joined them for prayers and then a meal in the evening. And in the morning, he just give a donation. And the 3 days previously, I'd walked along this road by a lake, and there in the middle of the road was 25 euros. And I thought we were just going to get blown away. There was no one about, nothing. So they were brand new. I don't know why they were there. Anyway, I picked them up. And so as a donation, I gave him the 25 euros plus another 25 from me. And he rushed off to the abbot, and the abbot came along to thank me and so on. And we got talking. He says, how many miles have you walked? Well, I said I'd done about 186,000 miles by that time. And the monk, who'd been there for 20 years, immediately bent down and was kissing my feet with boots. And I said, no, I'm not worthy of this. And I had to lift him up. And then we walked out to the square, where the trail was on outside the gate. And I set off from Santiago. But I've never forgotten that powerful moment. It was...
Gosh, and you've got to get out of yourself, haven't you, to experience these. You've got to get out there and give this stuff a go. And
yes,
I've always wanted to.
I just say, just set off, expect nothing, and just watch the miracles that unfold.
Yes, exactly. It's I've always wanted to row across the Atlantic. So I've just decided to do it, and all the stars have aligned, and I've got a boat, or I can hire a boat. I've got 3 good buddies to come with me, and I just wouldn't want to live life any other way. I don't think I could. When you become a family man, things get tamed down quite a lot, which is, you get beauty in other areas of your life then. But I'm just excited listening to your stories, John, because it brings back so many wonderful experiences that I've had in, like, the smells and the sights and the sounds.
Yes.
And we share a passion of mine. I haven't done it for many years, but cross-country skiing.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Isn't it brilliant?
Yes. I mean, the Utenheimen, from Littlehammer, I've done cross-country skiing from there, and from Jovik or something. Anyway, yeah.
Did you say Lillehammer?
Yes.
Yeah, I lived in Lillehammer for... on and off for about two years. I actually lived in a place called Øyer, which is on top of one of the mountains. I lived in an old ski lodge. John, it was incredible. Oh, I think we've paused. Hang on. Oh, sorry, John, we paused them for a sec. Yeah, I lived on top of a mountain in an old ski lodge with 70 other people. And yes, wonderful.
I'm very fond of Norway, and I did the St. Olav's Way recently from Oslo to Trondheim, 400 miles. It's a pilgrim route, but again, it was fantastic through the mountains, and I saw no one.
I'm just looking at my map. Yes. Oslo to Trondheim. Yeah. I lived in Trondheim as well. I lived on a small island just off Trondheim called Frøya. I lived there for 9 months chopping salmon in a factory.
No.
I paid my mortgage back home, and I saved £9,000 in 9 months. Just saying this for friends at home. This is what stuff you can do if you want to get out there and smash your life. So I got £9,000. I traveled for 18 months to every single country I ever wanted to go, with my tent on my back, my cooker, eating cheap from the markets and the shops. In Bolivia, you get a 3-course meal for 70 cents back then. And I did my first skydive. I did my advanced scuba diving course, dived on a barrier reef, saw every single ruin in Central South America, all around Asia, and that cost me less. I spent $5 a day, so £3. People say, Chris, how can you afford to travel? I say, because it's a lot cheaper than living in the UK, right? And you get your dreams come true at the same time. So I hope that inspires some of you good friends out there to, have a think about this, because life really is too short not to live, a life like John's lived. Finally then, John, coming on, you're a multi-faith minister.
Yes.
That sounds wonderful. Can you explain what that is for us?
Well, I was brought up a Christian, but of course, being in the Himalayas, you're introduced to Buddhism and doing the Roman Catholic pilgrimage in Spain and all over the place. And I think when I was about 65, I think a voice in my head saying, you should become a priest or something. And the next day I got the Kindred Spirit magazine, and there was this advert, trained to be interfaith ministers. And so I went to the open day, and I knew I was going to do it before I even started. And I did go up to the head of faculty, and I said, I want to do the course, but I have no qualifications because I failed all my O-levels. I think 14% was the best mark I got, and that was in English. But she just said, no, we're just honoured to have you here. So that was it. And it was 2 years in the seminary, and you learned more about all the different faiths and all the services. So I've done weddings and funerals. I've done over 500 funerals. I've for every faith and also for every nationality. I mean, my first wedding, it was in Sarajevo, and I have no idea how they emailed me, but she was a Muslim born in Sarajevo, and then became a Christian, and then she moved to America and met a Hindu. So we had all 3 wedding rituals in the city hall in Sarajevo, and it was the first wedding there since it'd been, after the war, being totally restored. And that was just something else that cropped up. So you just never know from one day to the next. I mean, in 2 months' time, I'm marrying a Frenchman. He's coming from southern France, and is going to be married in a chapel in central London.
I take it you're marrying him to somebody else, not marrying him yourself.
No. Yes, he's marrying Chloe. Yes.
Oh, beautiful. John, listen, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting. Just stay on the line. I'm going to say our goodbyes, and then I'll click the record off, and then I want to thank you properly. But for the purposes of the podcast, just incredible. I really think you're probably one of the most fascinating people that I've ever met, and I'm so honored to make your acquaintance. And I just feel so inspired now to keep on the path with everything that I'm doing. Do a bit more is what I'm trying to say. Keep at it. So you're a prolific writer. We're going to put links below to your books so people can find out where they are and then have a look through and decide which ones they'd like to buy. Is there anything else you'd like to promote, John? And of course, I also got to ask you, what's next for you?
Yes, well, I still want to finish the Pilgrim's Way, and then I've got the in France, when it's cooled down a bit. It's a bit hot there at the moment, but they've asked me to walk the St. Martin's pilgrim route. It's only 120 miles, but that's the first part they've waymarked. So I want to go and walk that. It's a prelude, really, to walking it all the way from Hungary to to Tours, St Martin's of Tours to the cathedral. So I've got that in mind in the next couple of years. But before that, I want to walk from Canterbury to Rome. That's 1,400 miles.
Wow. And do you camp out for that, or do you get accommodation?
No, well, you can camp out in France, but beyond that, it's more refuge, or you can stay in priest houses or monasteries. So.
Unbelievable. Friends at home, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you so much to John for coming on the show. And if you could like and subscribe and click the notification bell, that would be great. Massive, massive love to you all. Thank you again to John. See you soon.